welcome to Net Tuesday. How you guys doing? All right. See, we have some people who are high energy. The rest of us are all like, it's hot. Ugh. I'm sweating. Ugh. Although it's actually really nice in here. So yeah, Net Tuesday, because today is Tuesday, but actually, we are at Net Squared Vancouver. That's right. I'm going to do a little bit of name change-a-roo on you. And really the reason is because we're doing a whole lot more events soon, and they aren't on Tuesday. We're doing Saturday events. We're going to be starting a whole bunch of Wednesday events and Monday events starting in September. So Net Tuesday will only get really confusing. So this is on a Tuesday. It will be Net Tuesday. But the whole bucket we're part of is going to be called Net Squared Vancouver. And therefore, we'll change our little hashtag to Net2Van, just to make it all consistent. So you're like, all right, where am I? What is this thing? Who here has never been to one of these events before? Hands up. So many new people. Yay! Hi there, new people. We're going to put you on the spot later on. You're going to tell us all about you. It's going to be really great. And don't make that face. It's going to be great. You're going to love it. But anyways, here we are in Net Squared Vancouver. We are a monthly meetup. We've been doing this for like 6 crazy years. And we bring nonprofits and technology folk together, smash them up into like a big explosion, and we learn stuff, and we do cool projects, and it's a good old time. You are part of a giant posse. There are now 1,700 members on the meetup, making you the second largest of these Net Squared meetups all across the globe. And if you want to go and talk to 1,700 people who are keen on nonprofit technology stuff, we're always looking for sponsorship. So talk to me. Speaking of sponsors, we are here because the HiVE is generous and honest and true, and we are so grateful that they have agreed for this whole year to take care of us. And in fact, starting in September, they're going to be taking care of us twice a month. So big ups to the HiVE, like love them. Now I know some of you guys have Twitter boxes. You can share your love with the HiVE by tweeting at HiVE Vancouver and telling them that they're really fabulous. They'll get all bashful, they'll probably retweet you, it'll be fun. We are also sponsored by Hootsuite, who sometimes is our venue partner, other times gives us access to their Hootsuite social media dashboard. Super fun, you probably know them, we're fans. HiVE things, you could actually hang out here during the day, like I'm going to do starting tomorrow because my apartment is now covered in scaffold and leaky, crazy conduit times. So if you are looking for a place to do some work because you're tired of working from home or people are hammering, you can actually do daily desk rentals here at the HiVE. Affordable, you're surrounded by good people. You should do it. And one more sponsor, my employer, God bless them, is TechSoup, and they're actually the people who support all the Net Squared and Net Tuesday groups across the globe. There are actually 50 of them. So if you are a nonprofit organization and you are paying for your software like a sucker right now, let me point you over to TechSoup. So you can get anything from Microsoft for basically no money. You can get Adobe products at 90% discounts. It's kind of ridiculous. Now, you need to be a charitable nonprofit, or at least a nonprofit in some cases. So if you're just a Joe Schmo like me, you're out of luck. But definitely check out TechSoup, because they're pretty nifty and you get a 90% discount on any of the software in their catalog. Yep, see, Microsoft Office, they got that. You know, all kinds of fundraising software, they got some of that too. Check it out, TechSoup Canada. See, Twitter, I told you about that. Very exciting new hashtag. Check it out. N2Van. Woo! So we've already asked who's new, but now I'm going to put you on the spot. So, new people, I'm going to point randomly to 2 of you, and you're just going to tell me who you are and how you found out about this today. Pointing randomly. Anyone over there?
Yeah, me.
All right, go for it.
Hi, I'm Charlene, and I was invited to my mom on behalf of the Arthritis Society.
Nice.
So
Yeah, welcome, welcome. All right, and I know there are people somewhere over there who I actually can point at. There.
That's trying to spot. Okay, I'm Inda. I'm a product manager for a nonprofit in Indonesia, and I'm calling you guys on Meetup.
God bless Meetup. See? It's our place. Excellent. Well, welcome as well. And the rest of you, afterwards, over watermelon. So this thing is volunteer run, and these people are the very best. Here's some pictures of them, but they're also actually standing, a lot of them. See in the back, I've got Helen and Chad. There's some other volunteers. I've got David up here and Stevie. Where's some other volunteers? Oh, I've got Owen in the back there. Anyone else? Who have I missed because I'm a jerk? Maybe I haven't. Anyways, these people actually make this thing happen. I'm so grateful to them and all of their support. Chad got the watermelon today. David is really good at cutting watermelon. You're going to learn a lot of things about people. So you guys are also interesting. So at the very end of this night, I'm going to give you 1 minute to tell us about a project you're doing or something you want to get people out to. Like maybe you're part of an event. Maybe you're the Arthritis Foundation, or is that association? Society, yes. And you're doing something cool and you want to tell people about it. That's your opportunity. So like store it in your noggins, and at the end, you can share it out with the rest of us. And because we are going to keep you crazy busy, quickly, there's 3 more things coming up in the next month. Tomorrow, Stevie right here is going to be taking all of us down to the Lost and Found Cafe down Hastings at 10 o'clock, and we are going to continue the discussion that started here. So if you want to actually ask some more questions and chat about content marketing, come hang out with us. We'll drink coffee. It'll be a good time. In a week's time, on the 14th, we're going to have our second Video for Nonprofits event called Finding Your Story. So as they always say, like, anyone can make a crappy video, but it's crappy until you actually have like a compelling story in that video. And that can be a tricky process. So we're going to be bringing together, who's going to do it? Tiva's going to lead this one. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to pull the story out of your organization and make a video out of that. And then September 3rd, because we are now moving into the fall and our fundraising campaigns are kicking up, we're going to talk a little bit about a framework for web analytics and measurement. So it's really going to be a bit of a high level, like, what do you measure in your organization and how do you go about that? And then we'll have some tips on how to actually do that at a more practical level. But this is really good. It was actually an event we initially did at the Abbotsford Net Tuesday, and you should come check it out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's Vanessa time. Vanessa's been around for a while now, been part of our community. She's contributed. If you've been to a Net Squared camp, she's already blown your mind. So Vanessa, writer, storyteller, fundraiser. That's right, dollars with this lady. She's had a whole bunch of clients because she's smart and clever, and weirdly, isn't it golf? I know, my mind is boggled by that too, but it's what's in her bio, and who am I to say she's a liar? So ladies and gentlemen, give it up, Vanessa! Good.
Wonderful.
Forward, backward, it should all work out beautifully.
Okay.
Have fun. Yeah.
Thanks. Well, thank you for the intro, Eli. I'm really excited to be here, everyone. So as Eli mentioned, a little bit my background is in communications and nonprofit fundraising. And earlier in the year, I actually started my own shop with the goal of helping passionate nonprofit folks learn how to articulate their work and their impact in a way that translates into fundraising. And so I feel like that kind of fits in pretty well with what we're going to talk about tonight, which was content marketing. And really tonight's grand question, which is, what is content marketing and how can nonprofits leverage it? Can you guys see it there? Awesome. So this question is kind of what my presentation is all centered around tonight. And I hope that at the end you'll have a really clear sense of what content marketing is, how it can enhance both your marketing, communications, and fundraising, and also ways that you can easily implement it in the next week or And as I was preparing for this week's talk, I was kind of thinking about examples of content marketing that I've seen other nonprofits do, which was surprisingly more difficult to find than I thought. And I have a few, we'll get into those later on, but first I kind of just want to talk about marketing in general. So how many of you guys are familiar with marketing, what the concept is, and what it involves? Awesome. So marketing is basically that process by which you make people aware of what you're doing. In business, it's to get people to buy your product or to use your services. Nonprofits marketing can be, defined in so many different ways, and we'll talk about that a bit more. So I'm sure many of you will recognize a lot of the logos that are up here. Perhaps you've seen them on TV or on billboards, any number of advertisement marketing. And I was thinking about all of them last week, and from a very basic perspective, thinking about these organizations, they all serve people with cancer research, in that kind of vein of work. And they appear to kind of have a lot of overlap, right? Like there's certainly many more like them too that I haven't listed up here. So my question for you all, which I'd love for some of you to answer, is, what really distinguishes these organizations when we think about it? Does anyone have any thoughts?
Daffodils with the Canadian Cancer Society.
Yeah,
They're
visuals.
a big fundraiser.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Some are really like particular cancer specific, like an ovarian or breast cancer,
Yes.
where some are more big blanket organizations.
Exactly, yes. So I'd love to talk for a second, actually. Eli pointed out something really good, the big blanket organizations. So BC Cancer Agency and BC Cancer Foundation, Canadian Cancer Society. I'll be honest, when I was thinking about it, I couldn't really tell you the difference between each of them other than they are provincial versus national organizations. And I think that this kind of represents the problem that a lot of nonprofits have in the sector, is that, there's millions of nonprofits that are registered out there, and a lot of people are doing the same things, very similar things anyways. And it's kind of, when you think about a donor or a community member, it can seem very overwhelming and overcrowded in our sector, that there are so many people doing similar things. And, from their perspective, for instance, like BC Cancer Foundation and BC Cancer Agency, they might think those are the same organizations or the same thing, and when they're talking to somebody about it, they may not really be able to differentiate that brand and that organization. And so I think this is kind of where nonprofits are really missing the mark, is that, when it comes to community awareness and communications and ultimately fundraising, we don't really do the greatest job articulating what makes us unique, which is oftentimes our impact in the community. And, that's what's exciting to me about a tool like content marketing, is that it's a really great opportunity for nonprofits to showcase the work they're doing in a really engaging, fun, and fairly straightforward way so that people can start to learn more about your organization at a deeper level. So I first kind of encountered content marketing, I think probably about a year or two ago, and it was in a formal sense, like first time I'd heard the word and kind of what it was about. And the funny thing was that I actually figured out later on that it had been something I'd been doing for years. I just never really thought about it in those terms. And I think that'll probably be the same case for a lot of you. A very formal definition of content marketing. It's the process of owning as opposed to renting media, and it's a marketing process by which you attract and retain customers by consistently creating and curating content in order to enhance or change a consumer behavior. So that definition is extremely dry and very long, and I'm not sure it means much to most of us in the nonprofit world. So I thought I would kind of break it down a little bit more and then work on our own definition of content marketing and kind of go from there. So this idea of owning media is really key in content marketing. It's, that original content that you create for whatever channels you might be using. This could be video, it could be blog posts, it could be photographs, white papers, reports. Pretty much anything that you create in-house or that you have an agency create for you is considered your own media. And the important thing about it is that since it's an original piece that you've created, you're kind of setting yourself up as a thought leader or an expert on the subject. So for instance, with Canadian Cancer Society, for instance, they might publish a series of videos about cancer awareness and education, and they'd be seen as somebody who you could go to for information about that. the marketing process to attract and retain customers by consistently creating and curating content. So this, marketing is, as I mentioned earlier, kind of has that end goal in business anyways of promoting and selling products. So that obviously doesn't make a whole lot of sense for most of us in nonprofits, since we aren't really selling things to make a profit. And for us, I think the tricky thing is that customers can be defined in so many different ways. We think about our audiences, the different demographics and stakeholders that we have. So those could be anyone from donors to our clients, volunteers, board members, staff members, like the list could go on and on. You have all these different people. And you market and talk to those people all so differently. And I think that that's sometimes what makes our marketing processes a little bit more challenging. And finally, kind of in order to change or enhance a consumer behavior. So again, it's that concept of once you've defined who your audience is, defining an action that you want them to take as a result of the marketing that you're doing to the content. And so once you kind of have defined that action, and we'll talk about this later on, you can then structure your content marketing around that as to kind of push people in the direction that you want them to go. So what does this all really mean for nonprofits? So I was thinking about it some more, and I'm like, in general, I think it's pretty easy to say it's still the process of creating content, but instead you're doing so in order to attract or retain kind of whichever audience you're looking at. So I've listed out a couple of different ones. By creating and sharing content in order to influence their behavior, and that behavior will definitely vary based on who your audience is. And technically speaking, I think nonprofits have been doing content marketing for years, and many of us have been doing it fairly well. We create press releases, we write direct mail, we publish newsletters. These are all examples of content marketing. But I think that sometimes when you put a very large formal term to it, it can seem a little bit more inaccessible than it really is. So I'm hoping to kind of break up my presentation a little bit. I would love for you guys to kind of work in pairs for maybe 5 minutes or so. And think about your organizations, whether or not you're in communications or marketing, and just think about the ways in which you might be able to use content marketing and the benefits that it would have. So go ahead and pair with somebody nearby and chat amongst yourselves, and then we'll come back.
So once they know you exist, then what's the next job, John?
To understand basically how
I think you're on chat. All right, so it sounds like you guys have had some really awesome conversations, which we will continue because we're going to do more of these activities later on. And so I'm circulating and talking to a few people just about some of the ideas they have around content marketing. Chad, yours was really cool. Can you share some of the ideas that you had?
Yeah, so what we're hoping to do at the nonprofit I work at, Video Sparks, is for our next campaign, with a local fundraising company called Fundraiser, you can kind of have like a central campaign, so like this is like the main organizational campaign in the story. You can create sub-campaigns often. So Eli can tell his story about why he knows the Video Sparks side, or you can tell your story and then you send it to friends and family. But it's still, like the money still flows into the central campaign. So you can have like, here's our organization, like, nice professional, but then you can have all these personal stories that kind of feed into it along the way. So that's what we're starting to look at, how do we kind of frame the story so they're consistent but still unique.
Very cool. Does anyone else have an idea they want to share?
I have not an idea to share, just the idea of it's something that one of our clients is doing. We're working with the John Hopkins Society of Alberta, and I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the work that they do, but they work with, their goal is to keep kids out of trouble. Mainly those who are high school, and what they do is they work with teachers and give teachers materials through PDFs on their website, and then those teachers essentially distribute that material to their students. And there's a lot that can be done based on what they already have on the website, but what they have so far is actually quite good. They have PDFs on what happens if a student gets in trouble with the law, what they should expect, and how does probation work, for example, and what about jail time. And this is all fresh
All right, all right. So when I was in Suzukiville, one of the things we did with the Queen of Green is we had these recipes of like, here's how to make like a less toxic like facial cream, or here's how to make less toxic like window cleaners and household goods. And we put together these nice PDF packages, but no one could access them until they had signed up with their email address. So we had used this content as an acquisition driver.
Very good idea. Yeah, what I love so far about talking to everybody and hearing some of the ideas that you all talked about is that content marketing takes so many different shapes and forms. Like it's just this ever-evolving thing that you can apply to so many different mediums and aspects in your work. From collecting email addresses and growing your email list to fundraising and to sharing educational information with people. Like it's just such a robust way to engage your communities, which I think is really great. And to kind of continue on talking about the different ways in which content marketing kind of comes to life, I wanted to show you a campaign from 38 Degrees, which is a nonprofit in the UK. They're a very large advocacy group there. They have about 1 million members and a very large, very active email list. They do a lot of advocacy work around things like protecting the environment, human rights, things of that nature. And what I think is really kind of interesting about them as an organization is that whenever they decide to do campaigning and advocacy work in the UK, they go to their members and say, hey, like we're thinking about doing a campaign. What should we do the campaign on? And what actions would you like us to take as an organization? So they really kind of capture their constituency voice, which is pretty cool. So this particular e-campaign that they did, which is, okay, which was called Save Our NHS, which is the National Healthcare Scheme in Britain, was back in 2012 that they did this. It was to try to incorporate some of their concerns about the healthcare system into the regional elections in the UK. And what was kind of interesting about it was that they didn't actually have any money to run a big campaign like you would usually see at elections time, like the big fancy advertisements on TV, things like that. So they realized that they were low budget, so they went to their designers in-house and they created a couple different samples of things they might do in order to build awareness in the community about the healthcare issues. And then what they did was they put these 3 designs in an email, and they emailed their list and said, hey, we're interested in doing advocacy work for this. These are some designs we're thinking about. What do you think of them? And if you like one, why don't you vote for it and then help us raise the money to produce the campaign. So it was incredibly successful. They did this via email and they raised about £60,000 in under 6 hours, which I think is pretty outstanding. And the end result was a billboard that they had displayed in central London. But from a content marketing and fundraising perspective, it was very successful. But what I'd like to highlight about it was that they engaged their email list and their community in a couple really interesting content-based ways. So one was kind of giving them this inside look at what was going on in the organization in the initial email to say, these are things we're creating and working on. What do you think about them? And they showed this content before it was ever really publicized in the way that they would usually do it. And so involving them in a deeper way is a really great way to kind of further grow the engagement with your donors, and inviting them to be a part of that was a really great move on their part. So I want to talk a little bit more about marketing as we kind of segue into content marketing strategy specifically. And you know, when it comes time to produce content, you oftentimes think about your audience, who they are, what they might want to hear, things like that, and then the strategy in which to get that information out to them. So when I think about marketing, there's kind of 2 different ways in which it frequently happens. There's this traditional marketing and more magnetic marketing. And I'm going to talk about both of them. So traditional marketing is kind of this principle where you loosely define an audience, sort of, and then you hunt them down everywhere and anywhere, online or offline, wherever. You just kind of use this guerrilla tactic to get in front of them. And oftentimes it can feel a little intrusive, sometimes, depending on the medium. And I think sometimes it's kind of like having a handful of darts and just throwing them at a bunch of targets at the wall and seeing what sticks. You're bound to get something right in that scheme, but sometimes it's not always the most effective. And I actually came across an example of what I thought this looked like. which is a UBC farm newsletter from earlier in the summer. I love the farm, so I'm not picking on them for any reason in particular, but the quick jump menu on the side, which I think you can see very well, is a list of everything that was in this newsletter. So there's information on the farm market, information on how to volunteer, information on upcoming workshops, information on an event that they're having, all sorts of things crammed into this one very long newsletter. And I think what happens is sometimes is that when you try to jam all of your content into one communications piece, the water becomes very muddied and you don't really know what action you're supposed to take or how you're supposed to engage with this. Oftentimes, I think people kind of suffer from this information overload, and I'm sure some of you can relate to that. You get so many emails a day, you're reading so much, and you're constantly in this state of consuming information that when somebody sends you information in a large quantity like this, it feels like they're just turning on the tap and letting your mind flood. It's not very clear what you're supposed to do or how you're supposed to engage with them, and it can be a little bit of a deterrent. But the benefit for us is that knowing that that's how a lot of people react to receiving large quantities of information is that we can then structure our information in a very small, digestible way to make it a little bit easier for people. And that's where this concept of magnetic marketing kind of comes in, which is much more having a dart and throwing it at a very specific target and being a great marksman in the process. It's definitely this idea of creating content that's very clearly for one audience, and in the process of marketing it, that audience is very clearly outlined. So it's very evident who that content is made for, so that they can come watch it and they'll identify with it. And I want to show you an example of what that looks like, which is a video. Hopefully the sound will work on.
Let's see if we are smarter than we think.
Okay. Yeah.
So, let's see what happens.
This is a video. This is a video produced by Union Gospel Mission earlier this year called Why Do I Volunteer at UGM?
Starts us off.
My name is Wilma Bingley. I've been volunteering for about 5 years. I volunteer in the kitchen area. I started volunteering at UGM because I was retired and I decided that I wanted to pay back. When I see the people come in and go through the program and come out the other side, it feels really good. It's just such a good feeling inside that you're doing something for the community. If someone is interested in volunteering, I think you should try it because you'll enjoy it as much as I do and get a whole lot of satisfaction doing it.
I had a friend whose dad worked at UGM and he brought me along, and that's when I was first exposed to UGM and what happens at the mission. So when I started teaching, I thought it'd be great to bring class of my students down here so they would have the same experiences. They were on the front line doing the service, and they got to serve food to the guests. They also did the thrift store where they got to sort items. We also got to play cribbage with a bunch of the guests, so that was a good experience just for them to get out there, because a lot of the times when we're talking about service and volunteering, I ask them, what are you guys good at? And oftentimes they come back and they're like, oh, I don't really know. But how do you know unless you actually go out there and you start volunteering, you try different things. And I think it's just great for them to get that chance to come and experience what it means to serve. What am I good at? And UGM was a great way for them to find and figure things out on their own. We're all called to use our gifts. We're all called to give of ourselves. And that is a basic Christian principle. Jesus said, love others. Love others better than you would love yourself. A lot of the times when I think about volunteering and I think about social injustice or the downtown east side, I get overwhelmed. It's like, what can I do? How can we solve all these problems? But I think back to a famous theologian who said, don't let what you cannot do influence what you can do for that one person. that one life. I can show hope.
Good to be here. My name is Ron Barassa. I've been volunteering here at Union Gospel Mission for almost 6 years, mainly in the kitchen area and food preparation, and as a supervisor at the major dinners. My original reason for starting and working here is because it's in my makeup to give back. And as a retired fire captain in the fire department for 32 years, it just felt as an easy fit for me, and I'm loving it. Volunteering has given me a precious gift, knowing this within me with interactions with the clients that we see here. I can help them make positive choices in their lives, and I've seen it on several occasions. And it's pretty amazing to see that. I would say to somebody who's looking into volunteering like I did 6 years ago, you know within yourself you're here because you do have a heart and you're able to open up to other people and to give back. And there's not a better feeling in the world than to be able to possibly make a positive change in somebody's life. And there's not a feeling like it. I mean, I just love it. So it's easy.
So pretty interesting video. So who is the target audience for that video? Yes, yeah, potential volunteers. I'd also say current volunteers to a certain extent. And thinking about the example that we looked at with the farm, the UBC Farm newsletter, which had a link to volunteer and an article about volunteering in the newsletter, how much more powerful is this if you received a video specifically about volunteering in an email versus having it kind of lost in the stream of everything else? Would that be more impactful to you guys if you received something a little bit more targeted like that? So we're going to go back to our pairs again for a few minutes. I'm hoping that a lot of you guys aren't from the same organization because this will be more fun if you're not. So work together in your groups and talk to each other about the organizations that you work for. And think about what kind of marketing you're doing, whether it's kind of magnetic or traditional, if it's very clear who you're always talking to, or if it's a little bit more muddied. And really kind of work together to get feedback from other people and outside perspectives as to whether or not it's effective and what their impressions are of your marketing. So we will regroup in 5 minutes. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and regroup again.
One of those is to go to members and say, like, here's a tweet,
So it sounds like you guys had some pretty great conversations around marketing and what different organizations are doing in the communities. How many of you were pretty surprised by the other person's impressions of your organization and your marketing? Did it come as a surprise? Was it something you kind of anticipated? Anyone have any thoughts on that? Yeah? Jordan, do you work at a nonprofit?
I have worked at a lot of nonprofits.
Yeah.
Currently doing freelance communications, but
Did you guys talk about an organization in particular? Or?
And we talked about our client was on our society.
Okay. And what did you suggest about their marketing and what did they do?
well, we were brainstorming around, they've been currently working for educators. And I was like, why don't you just market directly to kids instead of going to the educators? So we were kind of brainstorming ways of how they could people and not have that kind of don't get involved with gangs, it's really bad, which I'm sure just goes, woo! So we're thinking like video games or,
And what's interesting is that we've been working with them now for over 6 months, and the conversation has always been around getting educators to speak with kids rather than really interacting with kids. And I was telling Dorothy that everything from their website to their PDFs has been geared towards the educators and not necessarily towards the final target market. So it's a question that has to be asked to them as to why it's being done that way. I'm sure that there's a reason, but it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think it's like many things, right? If you don't stop and think about it and reflect on it, what you're doing, you just kind of end up in the
we
same
need to get
patterns.
to kids. We has access to kids. Teachers have access to kids.
Right.
People get to teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Gareth and Michael and I were actually talking about how in like the sense of creating awareness around nonprofit issues, sometimes you fall into this trap of we need to make everybody aware of our issue. And then you end up marketing to everyone, and then in the process you end up talking to nobody, as Gareth said, which I think was really quite clever. And very true, because even if you are trying to create awareness around a specific issue, it's likely that there's a certain type of person, a certain demographic that's interested in your issue, and by marketing specifically to that person, it's going to be far more effective than just creating these big blanket communications to try to talk to everybody and get everyone interested. It's kind of, I think the harsh reality of marketing is that not everybody will care about your cause, but there are a group of people out there who will very deeply care about it. You just have to find them. Great. So we've talked about so much tonight so far, and I think we're getting close to 7, so I'm going to go through the last home stretch of this presentation, which is how do we implement all of this? So we've talked about concepts in marketing. We looked at a couple of examples, and you know, if we wanted to implement content marketing this week, how do we get started on this? So I'm going to walk you guys through a step-by-step process that I've used in the past. Feel free to kind of jot down notes, but I know the slide will be available afterwards, and I'm sure we will also be talking about these tomorrow morning as well, the copy meetup. As just mentioned, the first step in content marketing is really defining a goal for what you're doing and an audience. So when defining a goal, you know, you really have to ask yourself, what is it that you ultimately want to achieve? So like you were saying with John Howard Society is reaching kids. That's kind of your end goal and the messages within that. Going back to kind of the campaign we looked at from 38 Degrees, which is the Save Our NHS email campaign. What do you guys think their goal was in that? What was kind of the end goal?
There's a dual, I mean, there's the campaign, but it's not a huge part of like making the people that are their donors and supporters feel part of the organization. Huge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and sometimes, sometimes you might have one primary goal and several kind of tertiary ones underneath that that complement the main one. And then in looking at an audience too, you know, who is the audience that you want to respond to this or that is most likely to respond to this? And as I just mentioned, kind of developing a marketing profile around that person. So in the case of 38 Degrees, we'll use them again. You know, who do you think is most likely to be involved in their work? Just off the top of your head, who would be interested in advocacy work in the community if you have to define this?
Healthcare professionals.
Yes, great. Anybody else have any thoughts? Like, what kind of careers do they have? What do you think they do in their spare time?
I'm guessing they're professional, but a big slice of the crowd is professional.
Yep. I would also say probably people who are more politically liberal would be interested in that. So it's this process, I think, in defining an audience, which isn't often done at nonprofits, but is a really fun exercise, is to kind of go through and create a marketing profile for that person and that demographic to, yes, John?
Yeah, Darren Barefoot has spoken to us a couple times.
Yes.
His book, Starting a Noble Fire or Being a Noble Arsonist.
Noble Arsonist.
Which is a free download, and he really drives that home to the point where, like, find a stock image and have like 4 or 5 profiles. Like, okay, this is a John story. We're right into the Johns of our campaign. Really know, like, your 2 or 3 kind of core groups and target things like that.
Exactly, that's a really great resource. So yes, the more you can ask yourself questions about your audience, what their life is like, what they do in their spare time, what their careers likely are, you can kind of dive deep down into who they are as people and create really stellar marketing materials that they're going to respond to. And there's lots of ways to do that, and we'll talk about that momentarily. Once you've kind of got those 2 pieces nailed down, the next part is kind of going into content creation, which can seem really daunting, but it's not as hard as you might think, because I think there are some fairly easy ways to figure out what kind of content to create for your audience. And one thing I want to talk about too is kind of the great content divide with nonprofits. I think that sometimes it's very easy to create your message, create your marketing message, think about your fundraising campaigns and create all this great content that you think people want to hear. But in reality, your donors or your audience, your volunteers want to hear something very different about your organization. So there becomes this great kind of rift between what people are interested in versus what you want to tell them. And it's an important distinction in terms of creating content that people are going to engage with, to think about. And I kind of like to think about it in terms of broccoli versus cheese content. So if you were at a dinner party and you were sitting at a very long table and there's a plate of broccoli in front of you and a cheese plate to the side, what are you going to naturally gravitate to towards first? well, I'm gonna likely go for the smoked Gouda that's sitting next to me because it's more delicious and it's probably more appealing than vegetables. But I know that at the end of the dinner, I'm probably gonna wanna eat the broccoli. It's kind of like that with creating content. You wanna create content that's initially super appealing to people so that they've hooked on your message, on the emotion that you're telling them. Whatever that kind of key thing might be that hooks them in, that's kind of the cheese of your content. And then, once you kind of got them in, maybe it's one email, maybe it's two, maybe it's one story and it's buried in the third or fourth paragraph, feed them the information you want to tell them, then tell them your message. Tell them in a really creative way, but it's that concept of getting them hooked and connected first through giving them the cheese content versus the broccoli, which is what most nonprofits will give people first. So how do you figure out what it is your audience wants to hear? There's lots of different ways to figure that out. You can look at your keywords that are coming in through Google Analytics to your website. I also like to do just basic searches for words associated with a cause in Google to see what comes up in forums and on different blogs and websites, what people are talking about. Also surveys, which are a totally underutilized tool. It's a great opportunity to hear directly from your constituents about what they think about your cause, how they talk about it, what they're most interested in within the organization. I work with a couple of clients who do annual surveys, and it's by far the most valuable thing that they do all year in terms of collecting information from their donors. So once we've got kind of the content created, and you've got your cheese content kind of in its place and the broccoli in its place, it's time to kind of think about putting that in front of your audience, which is the marketing component of content marketing. And there's so many different ways to do this in terms of the channels that you might use for distribution. It varies from organization to organization. You might be really active on Facebook, but not on Twitter. You might love to create videos. You might never send emails. It's really important to look at what you're doing and what's working for you, and also how your audience is most interacting with you. So for instance, if you have a really active constituency through email, but not at all in social media, maybe it's more worthwhile to focus on creating things that look great and are readable in email versus focusing on the social media side of it. So you can look at things like response rates, open rates, all sorts of things to kind of determine people's interaction with content, make good decisions about the channels that you'll use. And another strategy in terms of delivering the content is to take kind of a drip approach to it. So I talked about earlier with the UBC Farm newsletter, that kind of like turning on the faucet and just letting everything out at once. So you don't have to do that. You can space out your content over many weeks or many months. I think one of the best ways to do this is through email autoresponders. It's possibly my favorite tool ever. So if you have people, let's say, like Eli was saying, Suzuki had people opt into a newsletter form first in order to get the content that they wanted. So let's say you gave them, what was an example you said that they would receive?
Fancy recipe cards.
Fancy recipe cards. Okay. So let's say they immediately get their fancy recipe cards to donate, or to download. And then you add them to a list that automatically they get maybe an email once every 2 or 3 weeks after that from you automatically through autoresponders. So maybe the next email they get is asking a little bit more about what they thought about the recipe cards, or maybe directing them to a blog post, and engaging them a little bit further. So you kind of create this continuum or relationship with the content over a period of time. So it's not like you send them an email saying, hey, thanks for signing up, here's all this other information you can look at, and here's the recipe cards as well. You divide it up over time, which can be really effective, and in the long run, when you start to create that relationship with somebody leading up to asking them for involvement, like making a donation or volunteering, that can be a really effective relationship building tool. And so finally, kind of looking at measuring results and refining what you're doing over time, which I think is really key. There's so many ways to do this through social media and websites and emails, things like that, to look at the results you're getting with your content interaction. And I usually recommend, it's great to look at things on a campaign by campaign basis, but even looking them kind of quarterly as well too is really great to kind of get a big picture as to what's happening. So I wanted to show you guys one more video before I kind of have some final wrap-up thoughts on this. This is a video from the Anaheim Ballet. It was part of a content marketing campaign they did last year, which was actually so successful YouTube did a case study on it, which is very cool. Highly recommend watching that too. The rationale kind of behind why they created this content, I'll tell you a little bit first before we watch it. They wanted to kind of take ballet out of the ivory tower that it's usually seen in and make it really accessible to people. So they found that people didn't want to buy tickets because they thought it was expensive, or they had to dress up really fancy, or all these other impediments to getting people to come down and watch their shows. So they thought that they would just create these free videos on YouTube to showcase some of their dance work and get people to engage with ballet anytime, anywhere, and kind of break down all that. So, oh, that's not on YouTube. I like to show that example just because I think, as we've talked about, content marketing takes so many different shapes and forms when we present it to people. So we've looked a lot at stories, at text, but it could be moving pictures, it could be just pictures, anything in general. And considering that the Anaheim Ballet's target audience is really people who are likely watching videos, maybe a younger demographic, not as into ballet, this is a really easy format for them to create something in that's shareable and very easily consumable for somebody just randomly paging through YouTube one afternoon. All right, so before we kind of wrap up, I thought I would just share a few final tips, tricks, and tools on content marketing. As I mentioned earlier, email marketing and autoresponder is one of the greatest things ever, so I definitely think they're worthwhile for nonprofits to use. MailChimp is a great service, as is Aweber. I know a lot of you also might be using Blackbaud products, so you might be using Net Community, or is it Sphere? Sphere the other one? Sphere is the other one. Do they have autoresponders? I didn't actually know.
I'm sure they have something in there. Don't worry, they also own Congo. They own it all.
I know they do. Anyways, so they may or may not have autoresponders. These other ones do, though, so don't despair. Hootsuite, as Eli mentioned earlier, a great social media tool if you're doing a campaign for a specific piece of content that you've created. It's a great opportunity to schedule your things out and not have to think about it too much, or at least manage all your channels from one location. Tid.com, which is a site I recently discovered and quite like. It's similar to Google Analytics in terms of what it will let you see, but it also gives you reports on what people are copying and pasting from your website. So if you have blog posts, this is a really great opportunity to see what people are interested in and likely sending to friends via email or other things too. So it gives you another way to gauge what people are interested in on your site. It also reports on keywords and things like that too. And finally, I think maybe the most important is an editorial calendar. So organization, I think, with content marketing is always key because it allows you to kind of get your ducks in a row and not get too confused over what's happening. So the more you can plan out things through a calendar, the better off you'll be in the long run. So I think that just about wraps up what I have. So should we open the floor for questions? Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So autoresponders, we don't use MailChimp. Is there like a fancy WordPress plugin so Eli can make like you want my recipe card, we gotta give you an email address, so WordPress can do that for me? Or
Yes.
so I just have to check my email here in 10 minutes to see that.
No, you can, WordPress has plugins for MailChimp. Like you can create an opt-in form using MailChimp on your website. It'll look a lot prettier too than having just like a text box. Do you know which ones it is? I think it's actually created by MailChimp. You can get the plugin for WordPress and then that'll automatically add people to whatever list you want in the mail server. Yeah. Any other questions?
My question is, how to sell content marketing to decision makers?
That's a very good question. So the question was, how do we sell the idea of content marketing to decision makers? Which is probably a really good question. It was probably like the idea of selling social media a few years ago to executive directors, right?
Or in our case, actually, a client knows that content marketing would work for them. The problem is that funders are the ones who ultimately make the decision as to where the money is going to be allocated. So they're the ultimate decision makers.
Well, I think the thing about content marketing is a lot of times it doesn't have to be a really expensive endeavor. So, you know, if it's an organization that works with clients who are fairly accessible, you could work with program staff to collect stories and photographs, which wouldn't cost a lot of money, and then you could always distribute them through channels you're already using. Is it more of an issue of like they don't want the staff to use time for it?
It's an issue of not having, it's not so much about having the budget, but in order for them to actually allocate the budget, we need to explain to them, okay, well, this is the kind of ROI that we're going to say 12 months time. So they need to have some sort of visible proof ahead of time that they should, for example, allocate $5,000 towards this instead of $5,000 towards someone who's going to visit X number of cities and X number of months.
Right. Well, I think there's an argument to be made that content marketing is a really valuable relationship building tool with donors, especially if you're looking at donors in an annual giving pool where there's potentially thousands of them. This is a very scalable way to talk to a lot of people with not a huge amount of effort. I was talking to Rob, I can't remember his last name. He's the president of CauseVox, which is an online fundraising platform in the US. They're kind of a story-based platform. And he and I were talking the other day about storytelling, which is more or less a kind of content marketing. And he was saying that on average, people who post stories on the donation pages or prior to getting to the donation page had an average donation that was $190 higher than people who didn't use the story. So for them, for them on their online fundraising platform, it has a fairly evident ROI that it is higher when you complement what you're doing with content. So I'll look and see if I can find any other studies on it too. Yes?
Do you think there's any value to aggregating content about your cause on your websites?
In what sense?
Basically what we do is we take a bunch, our organization is for people living with HIV, so we take a bunch of news stories about HIV and just put them on our website and kind of put some.
I think so. I think it always depends on who your constituents are, and if they're coming to your website to read news, then that's a great way to engage them a little bit further. Kevin was actually telling me about an idea he had for content marketing, which was using news stories, but kind of complementing them with your organization's own commentary and kind of adding it to make it a little bit more applicable to what you do, so that there's very evident connection for those people. Yes?
So, do you have content, Vanessa? Like, what sort of things could I find on philanthropy for all of us?
Lots of things. I Most of my work is in communications and storytelling, so I have lots of content for nonprofits on both of those topics, and a lot of which is on generating content. If you're feeling uninspired or lacking some ideas around what you could create for upcoming campaigns, you would definitely find lots of ideas there. Thanks, Jen. Anyone else? Stevie?
What about, what's your opinion on curated content for nonprofits? Like, is that something that
We were just talking about like aggregated content.
and like how could you, like, how would you do it on Story?
I don't have any information on how to do it already put together. I think it's valuable for some nonprofits. A good example of that, for instance, I think would be like Open Media. They do great newsletters all the time. I don't know why I just wanted to openmedia.ca, they have great newsletters and very engaged email lists. They do email marketing very well, but they are all about open internet advocacy, among other things. And so they quite frequently in their newsletters will do great stories about things that are happening in the news, but then analyze it and give it a twist based on what they're doing and how it pertains to their work. So it's kind of a way of curating content, but it's a way of making it really relevant to the cause itself. All right, I think we're wrapped up then.
Well,
Pass
great.
it back to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Vanessa!